Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Let's continue implementing the presentation layer. Now we have to use the toolbar that's going to be the first parent component for register and login. Under Auth, create a new folder. Let's call it toolbar. We need a small view model to control some stuff here under the toolbar. Let's call it toolbar view model. It has only one state, which is the form type, to allow us to move back and forth between login form and register form. Inside Auth, let's add the form type. It is an enum, login and register. Let's go back to the toolbar view model. Next, we have to add a computer property actually for the title of the dialog. If the form type is form type and the login, let's use the string resource and the text login. Otherwise, it's going to be text register. And we have to add it to the as an attribute of type notify property changed for the dialog title. We have two relay commands that we have to define. The first one is going to change the form type from login to register. Let's call it on register now, form type and register. The other one on login now. And that's pretty much it for the toolbar view model. We have nothing here to test, actually. All right, it's time to define the toolbar. This is where things are going to get crazy. The toolbar user control is going to be the parent of login, register, and user menu. And since we are going to use state hoisting, we need to hoist all the dependency properties from user menu, login form, and register form to the toolbar user control. Let's start with adding all the needed dependencies from user menu, all those fields. User menu open, initials is dark theme and whatnot. Let's add the state is dark theme. And for the record, if you are tired, you can stop here for the state hoisting. In other words, you have to inject login view model as well as the register view model. However, it's not going to be testable in isolation. Therefore, we have to proceed with state hoisting. And again, state hoisting is not perfect in all cases, but let's proceed with state hoisting to see why at certain points you have to stop hoisting the states. Because right here it's going to be very hard to maintain. We're going to see that. We need the current form. We need the authenticated user and to switch the theme back and forth. We have done this under user menu. And for the state of authenticated user, whether to show the user menu or to show the login button. We have done this under the other app, iOS and Android. We need a state for the dialog title as well as the register form state. We need to hoist the login now command as well as register now command. We need to hoist the command, login now command and register command. We need to hoist the logout command. We need from the register form the full name, email, password confirmation, and its dedicated feedback messages for validation. We need to hoist the state of login state as well as register now command. We're going to hoist login command, and we need to hoist the field, email, and password related to login form and their dedicated feedback messages. Look how many states we have hoisted. It's too much actually. We are not done yet. We have to add two more states to control the visibility of the feedback messages of the login form as well as register form. And we need to hoist all the events under register, login, and user menu. And that's pretty much it for the state hoisting. As you can see here, it's very hard actually to maintain this kind of components. Actually, we don't have any other choice to decouple the view from the view model. Now we're going to come back to this code behind once implementing the view of toolbar. Let's import all the needed namespaces and let's register all the needed converters. Right off the bat, let's disable the validation error templates for all text fields. Basically, it's going to allow us not to use the default border, the red border, by assigning validation error template null. Within this grid user menu, when it comes to visibility, it should be visible whenever the authenticated user is null. We have to use the converter null to visibility converter. And we have to use the dependency property authenticated user, and sensor type is user control. Let's add some margin, and you have to do as we have done in the preview, margin, horizontal alignment, vertical alignment. Now for the initials from the binding authenticated user and name. However, we cannot access the util function that we have implemented in the beginning of the video for the string avatar. Therefore, we have to create a converter. Let's call it full name to initials converter. It's going to use the string avatar that we have implemented in the core UI. create the converter under util. First things first, let's store the value under full name. Next, we have to return a helper function string avatar from the helper class. If this is not a string, we have just to return the value. Build the project and let's register this full name to initials converter under toolbar. All right, now let's assign the initials from the dependency property authenticated user and name. For the wishlist count, authenticated user dependency property, and we have to access wishlist count compute property. The next dependency we have to provide is the theme switch command. It's going to be from the dependency property as well as the logout command. Let's hoist the method on wishlist click as well as on user menu click. All right, let's come back to the code behind and let's modify this. Come back to the toolbar. Now for the value of the state is dog theme from the dependency property, it has to be two-way binding. Now we are done with the user menu. We have to show this user menu if the user is authenticated. If the user is not authenticated, we're going to show a normal button. Let's add some margin. It has to be basically the same margin as we have done here. And for the horizontal alignment and vertical alignment, the same thing as the user menu. As you can see here, it matches exactly the positions. For the background and the border brush transparent, you cannot see it right now. And for the click, whenever we click on this particular button, let's name it login click. Let's change the name under the code behind. And again, which is very important for testing purposes, the automation ID to toolbar login button, for example. Now for the visibility of this particular button, it should be again using the dependency property authenticated user. This time around, we have to implement the inverse of this particular converter, the inverse of null to visibility converter. Let's define it under core UI. If the value is not null, it has to be collapsed. The component or the view has to be collapsed. Otherwise, it has to be visible. That's pretty much it. Build the project and let's come back to the toolbar. Let's add the converter. All right, let's use the converter under the visibility property of this button. Now we have to do the same button that we have done under the Vuetify application by stacking the SVG file as well as the text horizontally using stack panel. It's going to be very simple for the first item, which is the text block, as we have done in Vuetify application. It's going to contain the label text login. Next to this text block, we have to do the SVG image login from a resource. As you can see here, we have the two elements, and that's pretty much it for the toolbar. The presentation is not that complicated. The most complicated part on this particular component is the code behind. Let's fold this section. Let's come back to the code behind and continue the rest. If you do remember, in the preview of our components, we have used the binding maker. In this particular toolbar, we need to create explicitly the bindings to route the binding to the correct component and to the correct state. We're not going to handle the binding in the XAML file. We're going to handle the binding in the code behind. For example, in the login form, we have to bind the parent components because anyway, we're going to hoist this toolbar to another component, and that component should be the component responsible to bind in the correct manner the states that we're going to use in the parent component. The parent component should be, in this case, the content of the dialog. It wasn't complicated under Jetpack Compose nor SwiftUI. However, in this particular section, it's going to be a little bit complicated only for the bindings, because if we don't bind or to route correctly the states with the correct parent and the correct directions, we're going to end up with binding failures. Before implementing this toolbar, we have to create the content on where we're going to include the login form as well as the register form. Inside Auth, I'm going to create the parent component, a new window. You can consider it as a gateway to access the authentication section of our application. All right, what we have to do here is very simple. We're going to copy the same thing that we have done under toolbar, the same dependency properties, and for the owner, instead of toolbar, you have just to add auth access. Let me do that, and I'll be right back. All right, finally, let's come back to the auth access to add the needed forms for login and register form. All right, let's wrap everything within a border. And let's add all the needed namespaces here. First of all, we have to snap the height of this particular window to the size of the content. Next, I'm gonna set the width from static resource, medium size modal. Let's not hard code the height as I said earlier. Now for the window style, we're gonna make our own style for the window to mimic actually the look and feel of the WPF material design modal. Window style to none. And we have to allow transparency. Background should be transparent and resize mode should be no resize. We're gonna disable everything that has to do with the window. As soon as we're going to open this window for login and register, let's place it at the center of the screen. Let's add a name to this window, Auth access window, for example. And let's hoist the method closed. Whenever we close, for example, this window, what we have to do, and let's set the title from the constants file Auth access. I think that's all. Now let's place within the border a color zone using material design color zone label for the title. And here we have to put icon to close the window. And basically the whole section should be under a grid. For the first row, it should be for the top bar of the window. And the second row, it's gonna be the contents of our window. Now for the top section of our window, color zone, it has to be draggable actually. Therefore, let's add a mouse down. Let's keep it at color zone mouse down. For the background should be primary. Let me zoom in a little bit. And for the elevation, let's do 0. Next, we have to override the style of this particular color zone. We need to add only for the corner radius, top corner radius only. Under this window resource section, now we have to target basically the corner radius. Let's give it a key. Let's say, for example, for the left corner, it has to be 8. Top corner should be 8. Right and bottom should be 0, 0. And we have to add the style corner radius from static resource. We have to put the title as well as the close icon in horizontal sequence using grid. For the first element, it's going to be a text, and the content of the text should be according to the dialog title from the dependency property. The other element, which is the close button, it has to be transparent, and here on click, we have to hoist this method as well. Let's copy this and paste it here in the code behind. For the tooltip, let's add the close label. Within this button, we're going to use the SVG image circle close. Now we are done with this top section. I'm gonna fold this. Now we have to put everything within a scroll view to represent the register form and the login form. The scroll viewer should have the row 1, and inside, let's wrap everything within a grid. Let's start with the register form, which is the most overwhelming form. Register and register form, it's gonna look weird actually when we're going to add the login form. Let's add some margin and we have to fill in the blanks. Basically, we have to provide the state, register command, login now command, full name, email, password, and so on. However, for this register form to be visible, it should depend on the value of the current form or the form type. Therefore, we have to add a converter under core UI, a generic converter for enums. Let's call it enum to visibility converter. It's going to be an eigenvalue converter. First of all, we have to check if the value is null or the parameter is null. In this case, we're going to return collapsed. Let's store the values for the enum as well as the parameter. If the value enum value is null or target value is null, we're going to assign the visibility collapsed. Now, if the enum value is the target value, we have to return visible, otherwise it has to be collapsed. Let's add the converter. And how to use basically this converter. Let's add here the target, which is visibility. Current form from the dependency property. We have to provide here the relative source, which is auth access component. And have to use the converter, static resource, and the enum to visibility converter. And for the converter parameter, which is register. For the login form, we have to provide here login. It has to match actually the case name of the enum. That's pretty much it for this register form. With the same manner, we're gonna add the login form. Just in case, I'm gonna add to the template for the validation null. Now we have to animate the forms. When we click on register now, we're gonna animate the form and we're going to animate the other form once we click on already registered. How to do so? Everything's going to be handled inside the resource section of our window. I'm going to fold this section, and we're going to use the technique of triggers. The target, basically, it's the register form. Let's start with this register form as a target. Let's set, for example, the initial render transform, the x position or the x-axis -50. As you can see here, once we are going to switch to the register form, it's going to be animated from this position to the 0 position under the x-axis. Now for the triggers, we have to target actually two properties, visibility and the position. We have to use the storyboard and we have to begin defining the animation. It's going to be a double animation. We're going to target basically two properties, the opacity as well as the translate transform x-axis from 0 to 1. In other words, from invisible to visible. For the duration, let's do 300 milliseconds. And for the animation, when it comes to the x-axis of this particular component, from -50 to 0, with the same animation duration. It's not going to be visible here. For the target property, it's going to be translate transform x. Now the enter transition, I'm going to fold this from 1 to 0 when it comes to opacity, and for the translate transform x-axis from 0 to -50. With the same manner, we're going to define the transitions and animations for the login form. We're going to do just the same thing as we have done earlier. Nothing to change. I have just changed the target type. All right. I think that's pretty much it for this section. Now let's come back to the code behind. We have some stuff to do here. First of all, let's hoist the method. When going to close the window, let's create this function. Let's make it public because we can't actually close the window from outside this particular window. Therefore, we have to hoist it. We have the name of the auth access window, and we have to do here close. As simple as this. On close button click, we have to do auth window or auth access window and close. We have to come back to the auth access and add those functions under the login and register form. And the register form, we have to add the function to close the window. On close click, same thing actually, you have to route it to the same function. Close click. All right, let's create this function under the code behind. On close click, we have just to call, it's the same manner, either to call auth access window close or just to call the function close auth access. Actually, I would like to keep it consistent. Let's delete this. All right. Now on close, basically where we're going to use this and how we're going to use this, it's been triggered actually within close window. Therefore, I'm going to add here a public event handler. Let's call it auth access closed. And on closed here, we have to do auth access closed to hoist this method. All right. Invoke and this an event. We need to create another event or to handle another event. For the onRegister form events, we're going to trigger only the events on register events. Same for login events, same for toggle login password and whatnot. I'm gonna copy the same thing from the register and the login form. The mouse down on the window, we have to move the window according to the position of the mouse. We have to check first of all its limits, actually the mouse down to the left button. Let's do mouse button and left. When we hold the left button, we're going to do drag move. As simple as this. And that's it for the auth access. We don't have any errors so far. Now let's come back to the toolbar code behind. Let's create an instance of the auth access component. All right, perhaps I have done a mistake actually during the explanation. The toolbar, it's going to be the main and the final parent. The first parent is going to be the auth access. Sorry for that. I thought about it and it doesn't make any sense actually. If this is a child component, it shouldn't have the auth access. Anyway, let's first of all deal with the auth access closed. Let's create another event. Let's call it on auth access closed. Whenever the user is opening the menu, the first component should be the modal, all right? Therefore, I have to create it right off the bat whenever the user has clicked on this particular button, login. We have created a function here, login click. Therefore, we have to create an instance or to initialize an instance auth access, and here we have to bind correctly the states. All right, let's make just a small example here. We have to use the binding maker, and we have to bind for the child components. It has to be auth access, state under auth access login state, because we are interested in the login state property, parent, which is this toolbar component, the source property. It has to be the login state from the child component, which is login state property. And the source is going to be from the parent component, which is toolbar. Under toolbar, we have named it login state property. With the same manner, we have to bind login email error, the login password property, the login password message property, and the command register now and whatnot. All right. Wow, this is the most painful section of this saga, how to implement native application from scratch. It is very painful because actually we have to bind everything manually. And this is the parent component. Therefore, after showing the modal, we have to bind everything manually. This is the child, the property under the child, and the parent and the source of the parent. And again, this binding maker is a lifesaver. We need to attach basically the events of, for example, under auth access, toggle login password visible. We have to hoist this and to use it here on register event, auth access close, and so on. We have hoisted those events, and the event is basically the events that we have done here. All right. After doing all of this, we have to show the window by doing auth access and show. It's really an extensive work. When it comes to the other functions on wishlist click, as well as on user menu click, it's going to be very simple. Here we're going to invoke the event wishlist click, and we have to invoke the event user menu click. And that's all for the toolbar. As you can see here, this hoisting is not a good idea here. However, we're going to continue this to push it to the limit. 500 lines of code for no reason. Anyway, hopefully we didn't do anything stupid. Actually, we have to hoist the method to close the window. Let's make it public under toolbar. We will use auth access if it's not null. I'm gonna close this particular window. And that's pretty much it for the toolbar implementation. All we have to do here under the auth access section, we need to implement the events to refresh the data and to set the authenticated user and to log out the user. All right, let's create a new view model. Let's call it auth view model. Let's leave it empty for now. And we have to define the needed events. We need to define the event on refresh data and the other event to set the authenticated user. In the MVM community toolkit, you can pass actually messages between view models. However, it's going to be complicated in this tutorial and in this project. Therefore, I prefer to use or to centralize everything within one view model to keep the user or the authenticated user synchronized. For the event, we have two events on refresh user data. Once we're going to refresh the user data, we're going to call a function and to set the authenticated user. The user should be nullable. Now let's implement this view model. We have to inject actually here the use cases. It has to be of type observable validator. It has only one state actually, which is the authenticated user. And again, you have to deal with the same problem when it comes to the one-time event for the subscription of the user. Now let's define the on events related to this view model. Let's create the two functions related to the on refresh and on set authenticated user, generate and generate. To set the authenticated user is very simple. We have just a set to the authenticated user. On refresh, we have to use the use case and we have to invoke the use case get authenticated user. We have to subscribe and let's add here the parameter resource. Now, in case of success, we're going to set the authenticated user. And in case of error, we have to call a callback function. I don't know, perhaps the session is not valid after refreshing the data. Therefore, we have to clear again the cached user and set, for example, the authenticated user to null. I'm going to add the needed callback functions or the actions. One for the success state and one for the error state. In case of error state, on refresh failed. Now, if we have an error under the subscription, we have to call on refresh failed. As a good practice, we have to store this subscription under iDisposable private variable, iDisposable. Let's call it, for example, user data subscription. It's going to be nullable. And let's add here another action whenever the user is successfully authenticated. And here we have to add the user data subscription iDisposable. Now, whenever the state authenticated user changed, we have to call the action unauthenticated by accessing basically the partial function from the generated code. Let's do the old and new value, which is very important. We have to check if the new value is null and the old value is not null. Basically, after the user is going to log out, the state is going to change from the non-null value to the null value. In this case, we're going to call the action on unauthenticated. This part of the view model is very important. Now we have only one function to implement, which is a public relay command for logout. If the user is not authenticated, we're going to do here an early return. Let's wrap everything within try catch. In case if we have an error, we have to call the action on logout error. Inside the try block, we have to do await and use cases, invoke, and you have to pass here as an argument ID of the authenticated user. And we have to call on logout success, followed by setting the authenticated user to null and disposing the subscription. And that's pretty much it for the implementation of Auth view model. And basically we are done with implementing the authentication presentation layer. And that's gonna wrap up actually our today's video. We're gonna take a break actually because we have implemented a lot of things here, more specifically the toolbar. For the next tutorial, we're going to do the preview for all the components to see if you have missed something. If everything is working fine, we're gonna move to the integration test for the view models. I hope you have learned something new. See you in the next one and happy coding!